We continue discussing big man things, moving from awareness to accountability this evening with writer and activist, member of the Commonwealth Students Association, Amílcar Sanatan. Now, his research interests include men and masculinities in the Caribbean, youth and student development, and cultural geography. So we're really grateful that he's making the time, and we think he's a very ideal person to have this kind of conversation with. Welcome, Amilcar, and I want to start off with the statement to get your reaction. Violence is a man's problem.
Oh yes, most definitely. Anyways, greetings, DK, and blessings for the new year, and to, of course, all the viewers. Violence is a man's problem. Why that statement may be seen as controversial, may get a wrong reaction from someone, is actually the global picture. Men are the largest perpetrators of violence globally, and also conflict driven by wars that we see with men and the deleterious consequences, the negative impacts that we have on women's lives, on children's lives, intimate partner violence, public violence as well. Men fear other men, the risk of other men, crime is driven by men. So that statement, violence is a men's problem, is a way we begin to think about how violence is not just something that exists in society. And yes, it is tied to economic factors, but social issues like gender identity, the way we think about manhood is something that we need to put on the table for policy discussion.
And definitely the way that we think about manhood, and that carries me into constructs and narratives. So even before we get to that though, I want to ask gender-based violence and having men responsible for that. What's your take on that?
See, the idea of men's responsibility in gender-based violence is to really raise the question of political responsibility. How do men, as a social category, men in society, see ending gender-based violence as not just a woman's issues, not just redistributing the burden on women who are disproportionately the victims to solve that problem, especially as we have men in governance, men in political structures, men with power and privilege in society need to make a decision, a very serious one. Should gender equality be part of our society? But at the same time, not to think that men are the ones who are central or solely responsible for stabilizing society. We are not stabilizing the order of society by trying to say what kind of men we want, but we are really asking a broader question of gender equality, about our humanity, and how women and men and children shall live in our society. And that is a bigger political project, which looks much more deeply than just men's behaviors, men's attitudes and norms. So it is definitely, yes, our responsibility, but we are not the primary agent to guide it. We are allies and co-creators of gender equality with women's rights leaders and movements.
I like the fact that you speak about having this kind of synergistic partnership, because sometimes it seems as though we can only speak about one or the other, as opposed to saying, okay, well, this has to happen, or there needs to be this kind of relationship. And even like looking at the construct and saying, okay, well, it's not just men talking to men or talking to women, because I see a lot of men talking to women, or women kind of speaking to the universe, but not necessarily men talking to men. But in terms of looking at Caribbean masculinity and saying, okay, well, this is the construct, this is what we're looking at, this is the definition. What do you take that to mean? And this also carries me back to having not just men talking about what a man should be, but hearing mothers say that, well, my fowl cock loose, tie a hen. So what kind of role does that term, as you understand it, play? Caribbean masculinity.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are more versed in this topic as we going on here, where you're looking at language. And what does language tell us about these gender roles? Or as we talk about tie the heifer and Lego the bull in Jamaica, about socialization, who could go out? I always talk about the unknown agreement T and Tech made with parents to keep girls inside when the lights came on, but boys could still play cricket and have fun. So these are the cultural values we created, cultural practices we have. And I think that is the starting point for the conversation. We shouldn't just talk about gender equality because it's good for the economy or that it makes us have the appearance of parity in political leadership. That is important, yes. And the economics are important, of course. But culturally, our shakshu, our quotidian, our everyday life needs to be shaped by these conversations Therefore, as Caribbean people, we need to be very clear in the conversations we have. The goal is not to engage men. The goal is gender equality. And a method we have for it is engaging men in those conversations. Part of those conversations is getting men to think very seriously about these received ideas of what it is to be a man. And that will tie back to wearing a mask. When I go to the parlor and seeing old men before the pandemic who would sit there, drink rum, talk about West Indies cricket, go on, harass women, and speak about physical prowess, even though they are struggling with the disability that comes with old age. So it's good that they have communion and friendship, but there are also behaviors and practices there that are not good for the well-being of the community and also not good for themselves. And when I passed back there during the pandemic, everybody with a mask, really around their ears and below the chin, drinking vodka on the block. Yes, they should have fun. Yes, they should have time. But also you are doing something that is not in your interest for your health. So having conversations where men are physically, but not where they are politically, is very important for Caribbean masculinity in the way we think about physical prowess, intelligence, even the post-colonial man that you have to go to school and learn. And the only value we have sometimes come from education. Education is important. I benefited from it, sorry. But we cannot think that there are always narrow ideas that makes a man. And we need to transform that.
And with regard to that, I saw you give a talk, but in your experience and your research, have you found a methodology of sorts for weaponizing masculinity, or that term masculinity?
Yes, there's no one with a magic bullet, as they say, to break these interventions. We are not fighting vampires here with garlic and a stake through the heart to end this. It's also an issue of toxic masculinity where certain men have this and therefore we could cure it. What we need fundamentally, the biggest method, if we really want to be honest, are movements. Movements which show the power of collective action to achieve goals, but also to define the values of the society. Movements advocate for policy. And in my engagements, yes, we have seen programs that have done great work. The Toko Foundation used to do with perpetrators and gender-based violence. Having men, one, feel listened to, but also get the psychosocial help to work through their traumas in their life. That is a good example of it. The Citizen Security Program, having community interventions with mediators, young men and women, training them with the psychosocial skills to see peer-to-peer leadership as a type of conversation we could have with men to address issues of violence, particularly gang violence. But there's no substitution for mobilization and working in collective groups for all of us to say these are our shared values that we must achieve as a society, which helps shape the policy conversation. And therefore, one of the highest moments I would have seen was through feminism, especially after 2015, speaking out against gender-based violence, the Life and Leggings movement, the struggle to raise awareness about Asami, the many rapes and violence against women that we have seen, and seen men want to speak out on not just why men should be protectors of women. That is not the approach, or the myth that men are the guardians of safety, but rather our society must be safe for all people, in particular women, who are at the hands of these indignities and injustice all the time.
Now, you raise the point of feminism, you raise the point of restorative justice, as I understand what you're saying. That reminds me of a line from Bounty Killer: when you show us hope, we will show you peace. So how does the system help the individual, and the system and the individual work towards the system? But we speak about that more when we return. We're speaking with Amílcar Sanatan, Big Man Tings on TTT. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue the conversation with Amílcar Sanatan. Now, Amílcar, one of the things that we wanted to touch on, because there's a lot of perpetration of violence, but what role does trauma have to play in engendering that culture of violence, and how it is individuals, one, react, two, treat with it, and even move on?
See, trauma is a national issue, it's a global issue. We have traumas in our life. Our bodies are built in with so much shame. I talk about trauma from combing a child's hair and reproducing racist tropes about a comb being broken or what type of hair you have. I'm talking about color and should we have a fair skin or a lighter skin person in an ethnic group. We're talking about religion. We're talking about marriage, reproductive ability to make a child. Trauma is part of our reality. People get robbed on a daily basis, have their homes broken into, clean up that house, and then live in that household afterwards. See, killings happen in the street and make sense of that. And part of that trauma is also the gender trauma. Some of the men hear it as be a man. They might also hear that from their mother. They might also hear that from their partners. We have also seen gender-based violence happen in the streets. And then for a long time, even for me, I thought that was normal. I thought this is what happens. I thought that it wasn't always a man-woman thing, it's blurred, because when violence is pervasive, all sorts of people take part in it, because that is how we begin to communicate. And you see, when we start to communicate with violence, when we don't think problems can be solved, when we think in the short-term issues, when we say anger was a justification for plain talk bad manners, throwing it out like that, then we reach a society that's always on the edge. So road rage leads to violence. Family disputes leads to violence. A teacher could be murdered by a relative. And that is the form of violence we could have over a weekend, where a new school term begins and a school is short of a teacher in her 40s, I believe, to violence. So trauma is something we need to take care of, but also to work with the government and challenge the governments to provide more support in public health around mental health care. But mental health care is provided, and we therefore need to have more advocates, to have deeper conversations, to encourage people to access that care. Mental health care is part of community care. The state provides it, and we need to mobilize people, not just to take advantage of these services, but to challenge the stigma around taking on these services. The same way I get a sneeze, the same way we get a cough, we have mental health issues that come into our lives that we could work out. And that doesn't mean we live in a society of diagnosis, but it means that we understand our mental well-being is central to our entire livelihoods. And therefore we shouldn't judge people. So trauma is very important to think about and work through.
But where do we start to break or create that fissure, the disruption, to start to deal with that? And I'm looking at in terms of collective action by men. I like the example, I appreciate the example that you gave of those men outside the shop, regardless of whether or not they're wearing masks as chin straps or whatever, but they have that circle, that understanding, that gathering. Is it that men start to check each other there on that circuit? Does it happen in the home? Because I can imagine you have a space that you think, okay, it's a little safer. So you're able to try to exercise new ideas even before you're carrying it outside and say, okay, well, this is going to be my new paradigm. But where does that begin on the collective level in your view?
And DK, I think you really pose a question to people like me who are on this side of the ideological fence. Men do gather. Men congregate. There are more men's groups I have seen all my life. You see it in the bar, see it on the corner, see it in the parlor. We also see it in the church with daddy's groups. We see it on the Friday afternoon lime. We also see it in the corporations, the institutions, the academic spaces. The question is, how do these men congregate and what are the terms upon this? So the job, my job in particular, is not to rock back, sound smart, have my opinion, and then call anyone who has a disagreement with me a troll. It's but to stand on the side of justice and be evangelical about it. We have to take this up as a mission to do that work. You quote Bourgeois, well, we have to sit back down with Bob Marley, right? Is there a place for the hopeless sinner who has hurt all of mankind to save his own? Right? Have pity on those who chances grow thinner. There are no hiding place. He says the Father of creation. But no one is in the hiding place from justice. And there's no greater act, political act, than to step into somebody's yard with a just cause. And that is our work. We have to do communication, but also build models of trust. We are not promoting gender equality because we're trying to push our agenda here, right? Push things or trying to change you and whatever. We are promoting our equality here so that we could be more safe, that violence is not our first choice, and that feelings of anger are natural. It will come to you, but you take skills over time to challenge it. And that is why corporal punishment and the licks we used to get in school, boys and girls, and boys used to get real licks from teachers because teachers felt like they could hold them licks. That is not normal. The licks they get at home We need to challenge that hurt boys and girls. We need to speak out against that. Child sexual abuse, really working with the children to have alternative ways of being and relating to each other becomes important to our work.
And once again, I come back to the question in a slightly different way in terms of where do we start to check our contemporaries? I'm not going to quote another tune because then it might start to sound more like a sound clash. But in terms of saying, okay, well, there's so many females just around the place that are victims to so many types of abuses. It stands to reason that we as individuals, as men, have people in our circles who would be pushing that type of energy. Is it that this is fatigue when that is a threat? Is it that this is something that we could let fly, but we need to check that? How do we start that process?
Yeah, as they say, you have to pull up your brethren. The Institute for Gender Development Studies had a campaign about that, pulling up your brethren. Part of it is individual accountability. That gender equality is something we reflect on, like racism, like classism. It's a prejudice in our lives. We must think about our individual attitudes and actions, reflect on it. A good way to pull up ourselves is to read literature, and read literature by people who are different to us, people with less power in society, right? That is what we do. And next thing is the interpersonal relations, how we relate to groups. A real drama for men is that WhatsApp group, saying how you feel. You have the right to have a space to vent opinions that may not be, I guess, fit for public consumption. But how do WhatsApp groups reproduce inequalities, share revenge pornography, nudes of women without their consent? These are things we could challenge and speak out. The joke that's not funny and say, hey, that's not funny. We could have a different type of joke. The movies that we say we want to watch, a different type of movie we could have. But more importantly is also the institutional work, speaking up and supporting persons in the workplace with HR to make sure gender equality is the norm, that it shouldn't just respond to crisis, but it's an environment we could create. In the school playground, the games that we have, the way that we see sports should be played. Having conversations, for example, equal prize money, that's a real conversation I have with my brethren. When you think about equal prize monies for men's football and women's football at the level of FIFA, and what is the responsibility of a global organization to support women's sports? I love sports. I shouldn't be less interested in it. We could do that. And the same way I support West Indies men's cricket team, I try to support West Indies women's cricket team by following it, keeping on top of it, if the media did more coverage of it, of course, but also staying on top of it, looking at players, because if I have a daughter and a son, these are the conversations I would like to have with my children to understand West Indies cricket that women and men play. So there's a lot of accountability we could have in very ordinary ways, but part of it is also showing something that is different to the reality we see all the time we're bombarded with. It's showing that other world, having different types of conversations, and we can do that and pull up each other.
Last 45 seconds, Amilcar, we're saying thank you very much, but that brings us to the big man talk of you describing yourself as a feminist. Using that for your closing statement, thank you.
Thank you very much for everything.
So we want to thank you as well on behalf of the entire news team. I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.